Welcome to CAM Radio, an ahead of the curve initiative by Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, bringing you every Friday the latest in legal and policy. Stay tuned, enjoy listening. CSR, philanthropy, giving. What big words and beautiful words these are. We use them in daily life. Today, CAM Radio is really pleased to present a man as our guest speaker who has walked the talk on these topics. Amit Chandra. He needs no introduction. In conversation with our managing partner, Cyril Shroff. This conversation is moderated by Rishabh Shroff. I at least am really looking forward to this conversation.
Firstly, good morning to you. Good sort of hello to you, Mr. Chandra. Firstly, thank you for your time today. I think we're very lucky to have you as a speaker in this very interesting conversation about philanthropy. So, and thank you to Mr. Shroff as well for joining us and giving the perspective of corporate India and the boardroom and what we are seeing across the spectrum as well. So, this is not something that we traditionally talk about in India, personal philanthropy. There's been a lot of focus over the years on CSR as mandated from 2014, where it's become more of a compliance conversation in many cases. I think people have been doing good in their personal capacity. People have been giving back to society. But I'm referring to your very excellent report of the last 2 years, India Philanthropy Report. Some very interesting insights have come out of it on how India's next gen, now gen, the senior generations as well looking about philanthropy. So today's theme is going to be your perspectives and your thoughts on where you are seeing this going, and doing a little bit of a deeper dive into what we are seeing in this space. So let me start with maybe setting some kind of broader context. So the sad reality is that India's public sector is carrying the majority of the burden about social spending over here. Your report had a very startling figure of 95% of aggregate India total social spending has been coming from the public sector. And more interestingly, even though private philanthropy, people in the private capacity giving back to society through their foundations or through personal capacity, even though that's grown, the contribution of the ultra wealthy have been dropping. So India's getting richer, people are doing well in business, the companies are doing well, stock market going up, etc., etc. But unfortunately, they're giving back less to society. So wanted your thoughts on why do you see this happening? Do you see boardrooms having a different conversation from the living room? Do you see any reason that Indians are not giving back? So just wanted both your perspectives on this trend.
Thank you, Rishabh, first of all, for having me. Cyril has always been one of my closest friends and legal who I've had the utmost regard for. So it's a privilege to speak on this platform. I must say that, me or my team take no credit for the report, because it's a phenomenal report done by the consulting arm of Bain. But I truly think it's a seminal report, and the most interesting part of it is it's a regular exercise. So it gives us a good sense of also the trend line that's being that's emerging from from data and where we are going. And I think from that perspective, there are a lot of interesting things that it tells us, Rishabh. My perspective, if you look at the report, and there's been a couple of other very interesting reports, including a study done called the India Gives report released by Ashoka Center of CSIP, Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy. And if you put all these reports together, what does it really tell us? We can look at things and either conclude that the glass is half empty, or we can look at things and feel a little bit more satisfied that the glass is half full. What do I mean by that? I think, first of all, look, giving if you look at the data by the wealthy, is still actually very nascent in a country where legacy of giving is very rich. This is the same country where philanthropy actually has been pioneering for the rest of the world. This is the country where Jamshedji Tata, the Rabji Tata, the Godrej family actually nurtured the thought that, society is the cradle of wealth, and that wealth, a part of it actually belongs to society. In case of the Tatas, they believe most of it. In case of Brodish family, they believe a part of it. And therefore, they put back large parts of those wealth back for the benefit of society. And then soon thereafter, actually, the West got onto that concept. And we had a series of extraordinary wealth creators in the West embrace that concept. So in many ways, we were actually the pioneer of what's now we are seeing is, the giving movement amongst the ultra wealthy in the West. But for a long period of time, that was forgotten. I think particularly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is what I would call the graveyard of Indian philanthropy. The back of giving was truly broken amongst the wealthy. It wasn't broken amongst the lower middle class, in particular, because we've always, I think, in the lower middle class and middle class, still cared about people around us. But I think amongst the wealthy, we went into a massive preservation of wealth mode. And so only, I would say, in the last 10 or 15 years that there's been a re-emergence of philanthropy in the country. And what the data is showing is that people are beginning to actually give back. And of course, as it typically happens, you first have the early movers. And so we have the extraordinary examples of Mr. Premji and Mr. Nadar, the Infosys founders. And amongst professionals, we have a fair number of professionals who are actually taking back and giving back most of their wealth to causes that they're passionate about. So I would say we are actually in the first phase of rebuilding what used to be a pioneering society when it comes to philanthropy. And therefore, in my mind, if I look at it, is the glass half empty or half full? The debate is you can decide whether you want to be an optimist or a pessimist. I frankly, I'm an optimist. I believe that, sure, there's extraordinary amount of wealth creation happening in Indian society. And all of us should be very grateful that we are living in a phase where we are seeing rapid wealth creation, particularly amongst the wealthy and the ultra wealthy. The place where I definitely feel the glass is half empty is that there's a divergence between the degree of wealth which is being created amongst the wealthy and ultra wealthy, and the pace at which they're basically giving this wealth away. And that, in my mind, is something which people need to reflect on and try to create. Not everyone is doing what the names I talked about are beginning to do. And I think that is where we need to pause and reflect. But I think, things don't always happen linearly in society. I think there will be some step changes, some step functions. And so I think the next 10 years, I expect people to course correct, and I expect a lot more to happen in Indian philanthropy. I do believe that this is the golden age of Indian philanthropy, and a lot of exciting things will happen in the next 10 years. And it will happen because some of the leaders are showing us the way of what the art of the possible is. I'll make one more point before I hand back to you. You made the point about government spending. I think the fact, Rishabh, is whatever we do, it's always going to be the case that the government is going to massively dwarf philanthropic spending. And that's true about any country. And therefore, the question is, should the private sector, should wealth creators care? The answer is yes, they should always care. Just because we pay our taxes and we create wealth does not mean that because, even if we give all of our wealth away, we will still be a small percentage of what social spending is. We should not give it. What we need to do is we need to make sure that the wealth that we give informs better social spending by the government. And I think that's how we need to think. We should not basically do what the government is capable of doing. We need to take risky decisions where the government cannot go and work. We need to fill those gaps. And very importantly, when we engage with social causes, we engage our mind. And if we are divorced from doing anything, then we build walls around us, which basically makes us, unengaged citizens. And which is why I think it's important to actually be engaged with social causes. So I personally feel that we should not just simply look at what percentage of wealth is being, accounts for total philanthropic spending as a percentage of total spending, we have to still keep at it, irrespective of what that percentage is.
Mr. Shroff, any views?
No, I agree with what Amit has said. I'd just like to add a couple of observations from the India Inc. Perspective in terms of what could be the possible reasons for the current trends. I think there are a lot of competing priorities at India Inc. as well. I think there are generational transitions that are going on. There are the entire kind of Amrit Kal and India on the rise phenomenon as well, which has huge demands on capital. So whilst the graph is going upwards, I think there are competing demands on capital as well. And I think third, there is probably a lack of education about how to do philanthropy as well. I think these are three contributing causes as well. And I think the good news is that at least as far as the younger generations and younger industrialists or kind of recent wealth is concerned, there is a lot of curiosity. And I think we'll come to that in a later part of this conversation. So I think people do want to learn. I think there is an opportunity for showing structures, for showing how it should be done, how the money will be spent as well. There is even basic confusion between CSR and philanthropy. In some cases, I found that there was a confusion even between ESG, CSR as well. So there is a fog of knowledge there. And perhaps one of the things that professionals like us should do is to demystify how to do philanthropy as well. And then there is also the tax aspects as well. But I won't get into that because at least internationally, in many places, including in the US, tax has been a big driver, and inheritance tax was one of the biggest drivers for philanthropy in the US. We don't have anything equivalent as well. So that imperative is not there. But nonetheless, I think that the commercial factors at play are also playing an important role in this. But I continue, like Amit, to remain an optimist. I think there is a strong cultural driver to philanthropy in India. I think Indians like giving. And I think that is where eventually I think it will end up. So it's a journey and the kind of work that Amit, you have been doing is very, very important in showing the way.
Let me ask you a question on one thing you just said right now about competing priorities. To look at it a bit more sharply, the competing priority could be at the company balance sheet level: where to invest in, where do we want to grow, how do we want to earn our money, how do we incorporate the best practices of ESG into how we earn our money and then deploy through our CSR. But this is philanthropy at the personal level. You are seeing the decline of philanthropy at the personal level sort of being seen with the rise in ultra luxury spending in India. Dior, Chanel, whatever coming to India, but people are giving back less to schools and to education. So how do you kind of marry these two trends from your perspective?
No, I'll let Amit also sort of give his take on that. But at the end of the day, it's the similar pot. And as it is becoming more and more difficult with the public market regulations to move money from one company to another, even for investment purposes, it has to go through first from a business. The money has to come into personal hands, and then be reinvested in other businesses in terms of promoter contributions as well. So intergroup financing per se is becoming more and more difficult. Consequently, the needs of a new business. So let's take a large conglomerate. It has got a lot of resources, but to move money from company A to company E is not as easy as it was before. It has to come out through the dividend route and then be reinvested back as promoter contribution. So there is effectively a tax there that limits it, and I think that is part of the reason where the availability of disposable, spendable, investable, donatable resources, there is a lot of friction in that journey. So this at a very practical ground, granular level, I am seeing this happen.
I would love to know more. And my neck is hurting because I've been shaking my head violently, agreeing with both of you so much right now about the themes you touched upon and kind of where do you see India going. One statistic in your report really kind of scandalized and shocked me in a kind of good way. Your report says that India just gives 0.02% as the current median contribution of an average wealthy to philanthropy. If we just matched our American peers and went to 1.2, that itself would create an extra 9 billion of philanthropic capital in India. Just an increase from 0.02 to 1.2. That's how I think far behind on the kind of contribution and involvement in society that we are in India today. So there's a lot of potential in this.
Yeah. I do think the glass is half empty, Rishabh. I mean, and from that perspective, and I think they're the lead. There are two, which is why I say we're in the golden age of Indian philanthropy, because I think if you look at the penetration of giving, which is, like everyone gives something, okay? But I think if you look at how much people give as a percentage of their disposable income, it's actually very little. And that's true across our ultra high net worth, our high net worth, and I think it becomes a little bit better when it comes to our middle class. It's actually a high net worth and ultra high net worth who can give a lot more. That's point number one. Point number two, Rishabh, which is actually very interesting, is that how people give. People don't necessarily give in an organized way, which is, I was referring to another report. India Gives a study, which is the first real organized study which has happened on how people give. You'll be surprised that people give more money to beggars than they give to not-for-profits. So just think about it, that if you really want to see societal change, you have to basically invest in formal forms of giving, right? I mean, schools, hospitals, institutions, organizations that are really trying to basically partner with the government on solving problems, right? Because sure, I mean, beggars are important, but you're much better off making sure a beggar is in an institution as opposed to on the street. But intuitively, all of us are basically, virtually feeding the creation of a beggar economy by giving 2 times as much of money to beggars than we would be to institutions who are willing to actually solve the beggar problem. And that's actually another very striking thing, that we are not trying to solve the problem by going to its grassroots. We're trying to feed the problem by trying to, feed our soul. And so therefore, I think we need to actually be more strategic about our giving as well. That's another great opportunity for us.
It comes down to how. I think there needs to be a big education. People actually who are giving to beggars don't even know what they're doing in the
don't even know what they're doing. And there have been so many examples that people have, there have been exposes that people have come out with of how these are rackets.
Richest beggars in the world.
And you actually increase, you get people to get into the formal beggar system. And also, I mean, I'm sure there's some people who truly don't have options, but, we've got to be very careful about these things.
Let me actually focus on the how part, which both of you touched upon very nicely right now. I think technology can play a big role in actually making it easier, simpler, faster, quicker to give it back. For example, a report talked about during the fundraising phase in 2020-21, when the pandemic was at its peak, companies like Paytm raised a lot of money for philanthropy. People could do a simple click and, how they pay for Amazon, they can pay for philanthropy and give back to hospitals and so on. So do you think technology can play a big role over here? We've been talking to a couple of, let's say, NGOs in the legal space who now want to invest in chatbots to sort of, reduce the cost of people, make, funding easier to sort of, allocate towards real cause instead of paying for salaries, for example. We are seeing the kind of online payment space really playing a key role in the giving back to society. Do you think that will have a disproportionate impact on making philanthropy easier and more accessible for the masses?
Yes, I think so, Rishabh. That's a great question. I actually think that technology, look, we should be very clear, technology will not replace certain things. It cannot replace empathy.
It will make it easier to get, but it's not.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think of what, thanks to Mr. Nandan Nilankani and his team, and what we saw, what got enabled, whether it was in financial inclusion or enabling of health services, etc. And there's a lot of other work which is happening in education as well, which is a spin-off of the efforts that his team have done. But let me give you a few examples of what you talked about. Many years ago, there was an organization Mr. Vaghul had started called Give India, which he chaired, and then consequently I chaired for many years as well. And we decided as a family foundation, along with Gates and two others, to actually make a big grant. One of our first big grants was to Give India. And Give India did precisely what you talked about, which is essentially it's a technology platform, much like a national stock exchange or a Bombay Stock Exchange, where anyone in any part of the country can basically discover NGOs by sector, by size, by region, and very efficiently at a very low cost and with proper integrity of transactions, be able to make donations. So it was in existence for almost 20 plus years, but we decided to make a big grant to upgrade it and take it to the next level. So we wrote close to a 30 crore grant to upgrade its technology platform, its human resources, marketing and branding. And that was just before COVID. They inflected from getting retail donations of about 30 crores a year to now they get between 500 and 1,000 crores a year. Wow. Now that's an example of exactly what you talked about, right? Which is leveraging technology and bridging the gap between retail donors and not-for-profits across the country. Think of the power of that. I've been working with the government on a committee for the social stock exchange. It's very close now to finally seeing the light of day. We've got.
I wanted to ask you on that. It came sort of in a big splash when the announcement came. SEBI spoke about it. It went on public mainstream media. But in terms of real impact, people using it, people wanting to give money and make it part of the ecosystem, at least I haven't seen too much on it.
No, because it's not been operationalized yet. I mean, as Cyril would tell you, it's very complicated, because what we are trying to do is we're trying to take what's a donation receipt and convert it into what's a corporate security, so that it can actually transact. You can transact on a Bombay Stock Exchange or a national stock exchange platform. This will be revolutionary. Just imagine, close your eyes and imagine that a donor can sit on a Zerodha platform, which basically means tens of millions of donors can sit on a Zerodha platform and discover an NGO using Bombay Stock Exchange or National Stock Exchange platform and make a donation on what's the equivalent of a IPO offer, and do that entire transaction seamlessly, right? That NGO could be sitting in Mizoram, or it could be in Madhya Pradesh, and you could be donating to it from anywhere in India or even the world, right? Just imagine, this is completely unheard of, right? BSE, NSE, the central government, SEBI, all of us have been working on this. It's obviously complicated, requires a lot of regulations, multiple parties, the tax authorities, all of us coming together and working on it. So we now have about 30 NGOs who are very keen to be the first set of folks, and it requires offer documents and all that is being worked upon.
But you're the right point about this. You're on a legal firm podcast here right now. So whatever help that we can help on the legal side, we are very much on board. And this is our way of giving back to society and nation building as well.
That's very kind of you, and we'll take you up on that. So this is the kind of, these are things which are leapfrogging steps. Cyril will tell you, he was an integral part of how the NSE step up happened. These are step changes that happen which transform markets. At that point of time, India was a small market. And if you see, India is now one of the top 3-4 markets in the world. So the reason why some of us spend so much of our time trying to get these things through is basically while they look like moonshots, no one believed India would land a craft on the moon. Some of us believe these things could happen and they could transform giving. So we've been investing a lot of time on that as well. We believe it could be transformational, and both the stock exchanges have been spending a lot of time trying to promote this under the leadership of the Honorable Finance Minister. So we are working hard on this. And there's a good example of leveraging technology to take giving to the markets to make it transformational, and importantly, then make sure that Indians are pushing giving in India, because a lot of giving in India was actually enabled by, by foreigners, etc. So this is the Atmanirbhar, giving initiative.
No, thank you. And I think, as you operationalize the social stock exchange, we will love to have you back once it's ready and talk about the vision and how you see it playing out in the new regulatory environment.
You must invite Dr. R. Balu,
yes,
who's actually leading this initiative and has done a commendable job actually providing leadership to it.
Thank you.